Alrighty. Here is Cryste, the Faith of Fire, Volume 1, Part 2 of the stream. Alright, last we left off, Cryste, our protagonist, she got captured. And we don't know where she ended up. So, we shall find out. I believe it was here. Yeah. Chapter 8. I need some water. Alrighty. Engulfed in the ball of darkness, the crowd, the city, Sophie, and Mikhail were all gone. Even the brother and sister who had been locked in the darkness along with Cryste were missing. Cryste felt as if she was naked, surrounded by water. Only a few glimmers rose from above her head, as if she was under the ocean. Things didn't go as Cryste would have imagined. Although the flowing water was constantly pressed against her body, Cryste didn't feel chilly. She was also able to breathe easily, even though it didn't feel like there was any air surrounding her. Although it looked like she was under the ocean, no fish swam by her. A flash of memory arose as if she had been in this situation before, but she couldn't quite remember where or when. Did we die again? I don't think we did. I feel like that she didn't die. She felt like an infant, hesitating to even move in this strange place, as she silently felt the breath of the water. In this empty space, Cryste's consciousness gradually became centralized. Is this mana? Although she only saw the door of mana once, Cryste would never forget that special feeling of the unexplainable energy. It's so hot. The temperature of the space started to rise. It seemed the sea could slightly perceive Cryste's attempt to realize where she was and gradually began to change. Calm water became restless, countless bubbles rose, and the sea was boiling. With one of her hands covering her cheek, the young girl marched toward the source of the energy. There must be something there causing everything to change. She knew she had to move toward it. Cryste stepped forward, trying to find the source. Is it going to be the dragon or the salamander? She could feel something in front of her, as if it was calling out to her. Even though she was reluctant, she could not stop her steps. Her body was driven by an unknown power, forcing her to keep moving. Suddenly, she entered a blue space. The sea of mana gradually condensed into a thick, globular cloud. A great black shadow suddenly born from the endless sea of mana. There it is. The dragon. Cryste looked upon the giant, condescending figure. Her young mind was momentarily dominated by fear. She opened her mouth, but she could not shout. Cryste looked upon the giant... Her legs were shaking. She desperately tried to escape, but fell awkwardly. She reached out her hands to support her fall, shaking and trembling. Flailing about with her hands and feet, Cryste tried her best to move even just an inch. She no longer cared how this must look. I guess she cared prior. Cryste just wanted to survive, to live the rest of her life. It didn't matter if she needed to get married, live a life without freedom, or even just a normal person the rest of her life. She might not reincarnate again if she died, and even if she was given the chance, she would probably become a normal person and lose all of her memories. Either way, the existence of herself would be wiped out completely from this world. How do you know that? The blue atmosphere gradually melted into the deeper darkness. With infinite pressure, a giant monster finally appeared from the shadow. I thought I was there the whole time. Oh, okay, I see. Cryste had seen it once before, in front of the Door of Mana. She even looked through some books on it specifically, but even 1,000 descriptions from the books could not come close to the real thing in front of her. Not to mention the violent shaking and its massive size and difficulty to read. The already darkened mana suddenly turned blood red. At first it was just like a wave of heat radiating from an asphalt road in the summer sun, but it gradually became unbearably hot, and now even the rock underfoot is beginning to soften. Flame Dragon, the god of Gardent. Its magnificent stance seemed to be all that was needed to crush the entire earth. Move, body, please, move. Why can't I move? My heart's throbbing in my chest, but I'm stuck on the floor as if it was made of quicksand. No, I need to do something. Otherwise my body will become just a smear of blood and fat, even if I was simply scratched by its sharp claws. I can't die like that. I especially don't want to be burned and blown away as a pile of ashes. Suddenly, Cryste felt a chill penetrating deep into her bones. Her overheating body was suddenly surrounded by a cooling breeze. The giant monster didn't leave. Instinctively, Cryste didn't think the monster would let her leave so easily. What will it do now? It's a good question. It's just standing there. Its rough front claws carefully moved around Cryste's body. If it grabbed only a little harder, Cryste would have melted like wax, being thrown into an oven. Luckily, it didn't grab too hard. I guess so. But it seems to be the limit. It seemed to sense Cryste's fear. The giant dragon roared again. That's kind of a pathetic roar. The girl's mind was almost blown away, but was pulled back by its roar, and she suddenly found herself high up in the air. How can anyone call you the flame salamander? You're just a brute animal. Cryste began to insult it, although she didn't expect this cold-blooded animal to understand. Come on, if you are truly the symbol of the kingdom, put me down now. I am the princess of this kingdom. Tears fell down Cryste's cheek. If I were my sister, I would easily be able to slice off its claws. I don't think so. If it was a human, even if I was attacked, I probably wouldn't be killed, but this is a dangerous beast. And why am I so useless? Didn't my father say I had my own talent? Is this the end of being able to show my talent? Will I be burned alive by this evil dragon? I don't want to die. What makes you think it's evil? I don't want to die here. My sister, Mikhail. Help me, Noel. No, she called out Noel. Interesting. She's only known Noel for like, what, 4 days? She thought of her family, but another name formed on her lips. Yeah, that is a shock to me. Barv Saza. Ice punishment. Whoa, did Mikhail come to save us? With a crunching sound, the giant lizard wailed. It sounded like a wolf. Then an eruption of sound came crashing down, like ice hitting the ground. A series of bolts of light flashed across the barrier of the fire over the dragon's scales. Countless ice blades hit it, each one avoiding Cryste. Cryste looked around for the source of the young voice. What was more real than her predicament was the boy, casting his spells. It's Noel! This desperate girl had never even imagined that the hero would show up to save the princess. An icicle smashed into the forearm of the salamander. The dragon wailed and opened its hand, dropping Cryste from high in the air. Okay, I suppose it is kind of persuading me that it's a little evil, maybe? No. This height. Noel was so far away that he couldn't catch her, even if he was to use wind magic. Cryste closed her eyes in despair. Huh? Cryste thought she would smash into the rocks like a piece of tofu. But in reality, she landed in gentle arms and a warm embrace. Cryste gawked at the girl with her different colored eyes, who was painting in front of her. Sylvie! Sylvie caught her and deftly avoided a hit from the dragon, and was able to perfectly hide behind a rock. Sylvie caught her and oh, thank you so much! Don't thank me. It's because my brother decided to save you. Despite her unsparing speech, Cryste could see hot sweat gathering on her forehead. Even for those skilled at wind magic, it was still hard to run in this hot environment. Anyway, it's not over yet. The fight has only begun. Seeing that both Cryste and Sylvie were safe, Noel in the distance breathed a sigh of relief. He then continued to cast the icy blades toward the enemy. Barv Sava! That's right. Teach that monster a lesson. Noel chanted the mantra as often as he could, and the ice repeatedly smashed against the body of the monster. But as time passed, Noel seemed to be out of breath. Brother, he's almost reached his limit. Stay where you are, I'm going to help him. She was ready to take action before Cryste spoke. Don't be impulsive, you can't win even if you help him. That's the flame salamander. Cryste pulled back the girl who wanted to help. How do you know that I can't win? I've seen the salamander before in front of the door of mana. What? The girl looked surprised as if she couldn't believe what Cryste just said. Sylvie seemed to understand something and turned her head to take a look at her brother. Oh, they don't realize what they're fighting. No matter what happens, I have to go. You won't hold out much longer without my help. Trust your brother. You only distract him by rushing out. How could you know about how he'll react? You're just a stranger to our family. The girl roared angrily. Cryste couldn't quite understand, but although she didn't particularly dislike the boy, she never treated him as an important person before. but her feelings toward him had slightly shifted just now. Only after confronting the monster did Cryste realize how scary it really is. It's not a fight that could be won with courage alone. But the boy in front of her was still facing it. Cryste looked calmly at the growling demon in front of her. Cryste pulled Sylvie back and hid behind the rock, not due to fear, but because it was the best way to deal with the situation. And she was the only actual grown-up here. Noel and Sylvie are real children. Even though their age, I think they're actually old. Well, no, I think Noel's older than Cryste. I think Sylvie might be younger. I need to bring them back alive. Cryste felt she had a responsibility. When Cryste thought about her previous life, she thought she was not only a 20-year-old bachelor with a boring life. I can be the flame of hope, too. Noel in the distance was trying to fight the giant monster. As Sylvie was saying, although the dragon was initially on the defense, it seemed that it had already started to adapt to his hits, and then its tail slashed out through the air and smashed through Noel's icicles. Yeah, it's starting to get dire. As flames erupted from his mouth, Noel dodged and quickly slid behind a rock. He waved to Sylvie to signal he was alright as he hid just a few rocks away. See, Noel can run away if he wants to run. I'm sorry. After seeing her brother successfully escaping from the battle, Sylvie calmed down a little bit. For what? Just from what I said before, about you being a stranger. Oh, that's alright. I'm certainly a stranger compared to you two. Sylvie apologized to Cryste with a deep blush showing on her cheeks, but didn't seem overly satisfied with Cryste's response. There's no time to focus on that now. Our purpose is not to beat this monster. We need to get out of here. Cryste wasn't able to focus before, but now that she was free, she was able to look around. They were in a large flat cave, the size of 2 football fields. On the ceiling of the cave, large stalactites hung menacingly. There were 2 exits on the far side of the wide space. It was impossible to judge which one, if either was an exit. Cryste didn't know which side was connected to the outside world, and then it was more likely that there would be no connection to the outside from the caves. She knew that it would be impossible to predict anything in this strange world of the flame salamander, but even in such a wide space, the scorching heat will still ravage at her skin, and each breath was like inhaling steam. There was no time to hesitate. Cryste thought that even if the monster didn't catch her, she would die of dehydration caused by the heat. Noel, keep it up with your magic and we'll have a chance to escape through the cave behind the monster. Cryste yelled to Noel from behind her rock. Why don't we go through that other cave? The exit over there is narrower, and if we hide there, it will be too big to fit inside. Cryste quickly came up with a reason for her choice. I can't just tell him that this is a woman's special sixth sense after all. That makes sense. Please trust me this once. With a loud crumbling sound, the rock they were hiding behind was smashed into pieces. The gig's up. Gotta go, brother. Sylvie's reaction was swift, and Cryste was pulled in front of the monster. Sylvie turned around and shot a fireball into the cave ceiling. With sparks flying, a broken stalactite fell on the salamander's head. Ouch! Even this brief moment when the monster lost track of its prey was enough for the brother and sister to react. Cryste was cradled in Sylvie's arms, and they ran into the salamander's body. Meanwhile, Noel escaped from the other side, stepping around the salamander's claws. It was flawless teamwork. Before the salamander was able to turn around its heavy body, they had run off into the caves at its rear. Let's get out of here! Well, obviously. Did you think we would just stand here? Of course, we have to get out of here. Sylvie's hands were trembling. Even a calm and level-headed girl like Sylvie would be afraid in the presence of such a strong monster. But even though she was trembling in fear, she insisted that Noel go first. She's really into her brother. We should be safe here. You can't just let your guard down like that. Cryste was so nervous she almost jumped upon hearing him. Whoa, something exploded. Just as he said this, the monster showed in a rage. It stretched its neck and peeped its head into the hole, watching them. But the hole was so narrow that it couldn't reach its prey, no matter how hard it tried to squeeze through. So it's just gonna, like, breathe fire on us. That would be cool. On second thought, it's not very safe here at all. Keep moving! The giant salamander tried to breathe fire at them, but Noel swiftly cast a series of ice spells to counter it. Yes! Sylvie said softly, not meaning for Cryste to hear her. The monster behind them kept bashing at the rock like an earthquake, and the whole channel seemed to be crumbling under its impact. This better be the way out. They fled through the narrow entrance with the monster slowly breaking its way through behind them. They ran deeper and deeper into the channel without paying attention to where they were headed. The channel here isn't able to hold under the salamander's attacks. I don't even want to imagine what would happen to us. The thought flashed through Sylvia's mind, but she didn't have any energy to entertain it. She was still holding onto Cryste tightly, and her bangs were saturated with sweat. Cryste, who was still in Sylvia's arms, stretched her hand out and wiped away some sweat from her brow. Hey, what are you doing? I'm just wiping away your sweat. Mind your own business. Oh. Sylvia was shouting loudly, but Cryste didn't sense any anger in her voice. Cryste didn't know if it was because of the temperature of the cave or what, but her cheeks had become quite red. Uh-oh. Unfortunately, there was no exit at the end of this tunnel. The light that they had been following was coming from a huge pool of molten lava. There an exit connected to the outside world into this pool? They were thinking of jumping down to the sides of the pool to find the exit. If it were water, Cryste would have thought of jumping in, but even in water she wasn't able to hold her breath for very long, let alone 1,000-degree magma. Cryste, it looks like we chose the wrong tunnel. Noel, who was in the front, stopped and shook his head in frustration at Cryste. Like it's her fault. Sorry, we should have chosen the other tunnel. What did I say to Sylvia about trusting me? And now I've shamefully led them to a dead end. Sylvia gently put Cryste down. Well, now that this plan failed, we have no choice but to face that creature. But our magic, you must feel it too. It's a lot harder than usual to connect the door of mana here. Noel did not act, and there was some hesitation in his voice. Sylvia's properties were wind and fire, meaning she could only play a very small role in this battle. From the beginning, she had been holding on to Cryste, and she must have lost a lot of energy by using wind magic to keep up with Noel. As for Noel, how long would he be able to sustain himself after already using several spells? Maybe during the next battle, Noel will have already reached his limit. The lizard, though it looked dumb and big, was actually not stupid at all, and they wouldn't be able to escape if Noel only used his ice magic. What a hopeless situation. Rocks fell from the ceiling, splashing into the molten pool. Cryste, startled, took a big step back. How deep is this pool? Would you like to jump in and see? Cryste shook her head, looking at Noel. I remember, Noel has the water property. What is the extent of your spells? I'm wondering if we could change this molten magma back into solid rock. Noel took a deep breath and slowly opened his mouth. I could probably have a chance to touch the boundaries of the great magic, but it takes time to prepare, and I'll only be able to launch it once. Can you explain it in detail? Cryste has no concept of the term great magic. Cryste, can't you see how tired he is? We don't even know if your plan will work. When Cryste tried to ask more details of Noel, Sylvie shouted out her name. The girl looked like she was about to cry, with her eyes partially covered with messy bangs reflecting a moist sheen. What does it mean when a girl shows such an expression? Of course, Cryste knew how she was feeling. Am I being too selfish? After being rescued by Noel and Sylvie, I was the only one who led up to this dead end. Now I want to use the last of her brother's power, who's more important than her own life, to pull off this risky move? Silence gathered among us as if time stopped. Only the pounding of the flame salamander reverberated clearly in their ears. It seemed like such a long time that it was almost suffocating. The boys' laughter suddenly rang throughout the space. What are you worried about? Don't look like this, Sylvie. Noel patted his sister's head gently and smiled brightly. Did the heat cause him to lose his mind? For a moment, Cryste didn't understand why Noel was acting like this. Finally realized what was going on after looking at the girl's rosy cheeks as the atmosphere slightly calmed down. Noel, you're really a genius, in all respects. Like the ocean at high tide, if it wasn't already filled with magma, I'd be able to fill this entire cave with water using my magic. Listening to the boy's confident words, Cryste smiled happily. Cryste believed in Noel, and her life seemed to be guarded by his strength. This was not just despairing optimism, but almost like a vision arising through magic. We will definitely not die here. Absolutely not. That's the problem. Monster smashed into the rocks again and again, causing stones to fall from the sides of the cavern into the magma and melt into a cloud of dust. The monster didn't care about these caves. It didn't care what these humans were doing. It just knew that its prey was in beyond here, and it wasn't going to give up. Boom, boom. It growled into the air, echoing throughout the entire cavern. To engulf the world with tremors seemed to be its goal. The cave wouldn't collapse. If it was that easy, the monster won't have to try so hard. But finally, the solid wall of stone crumbled into pieces. The monster used its strong hind legs to leap into the cavern. The flame salamander kept blinking its strong eyelids, looking around at the surrounding environment. This was a smaller cave than the one it was in originally, and almost half of it was covered in magma. As far as it could see, there was no way out except for one small hole at the side. The dragon lashed its tails against the rock wall, and the small hole was covered with fallen gravel, leaving only the tunnel that the monster came through. Oh, what now? No one has ever been able to escape the flame salamander. And how shameful, crouching in the corner like mice. It's a dead end. Wait, why is that guy kneeling down like that over there? Oh, ice god, he who lives in the far lands of ice and cold, please come to me. Hear me, obey my call. Forget it, I don't care about him. The monster didn't care what Noel was doing. It was the flame salamander. The ice god's magic was powerless against it. Instead, its eyes were glued to the silver-haired girl. She looked so worried, but was still so beautiful. She just stood there staring up at the monster, her hands folded together as if she was praying. But the salamander only had one goal from the beginning. The giant salamander suddenly leaped into the pool of molten rock with a splash of lava that caused the girl to tighten her heart in a flash. A normal person could not endure molten lava even for half a second, but the monster, it seemed to be the equivalent of water. Although they didn't know what was going to happen, they hoped it would be all over soon. Noel was still kneeling on the ground, probably too frightened to move. White snow, crystal frost, gather to my side. Feel my pain. Grant me your overwhelming power. The blonde-haired girl walked up to the silver-haired girl and tugged on her hair, signaling her to run. So these kids still want to keep running, do they? Sticking its tail out of the magma, it slammed it down at the two girls. Sylvie quickly leaped to the ground to avoid the attack, but perhaps her movements were too sudden and she lost her balance, falling to the ground. Cryste fell as well. Looking at the desperation in their eyes, the flame salamander elegantly stretched out its claws. If I touched these little girls with my claws, would they immediately turn into wisps of smoke? She's really what I'm looking for. She won't. It eventually started to crawl out of the magma pool, using mana to lower its body temperature. But at the moment it was about to touch the girl. Swish! Sharp wind tied around its claws, preventing it from moving any closer. Don't touch her with your filthy claws! Sylvie's voice was so forceful it attracted the attention of the salamander. Although the moment a flame salamander shifted his gaze, something happened. I know what's gonna happen, I think. The all-freezing silver snowstorm. Entomb everything in snow. So, is it gonna get... If the molten lava... Because it depends on whether or not I was mistaken on whether the salamander is out of the lava. If it's out of the lava, no. But if it's in the lava, it's going to turn the lava into molten rock and encase it. The faint blue glow from Noel's hands suddenly shone with a blinding light. Oh, yes, quite. A powerful blizzard with gale force winds came roaring out from the magical light, snapping at the monster's body. The force of the impact pushed it back into the magma. Okay. Thick with solid water vapor, the bright blue light filled the whole cavern, outshining even the glowing magma. When did this kid come up with such an idea? Ridiculous. You even delayed it. I am the flame salamander. I can't be hurt by such vile magic. You just push me into the magma again and again. I can still burn you to ashes, even from way over here. You're just lucky that silver-haired girl is standing there. But now that you dare make me angry, I'll get rid of you first, in the messiest way possible. Get rid of... wipe you out, huh? Suddenly it could see nothing but a wall of white in front of it. Steam was rising in a huge cloud. The three people had disappeared. When the salamander tried to step out of the magma, it realized something was wrong. His feet began to solidify. The giant lizard didn't even realize that the magma around him was no longer liquid. The magma, which was deep enough to touch his abdomen, was smoking and hardened into a solid mouse. If it could move its arms and legs, it couldn't break it. But its strong limbs were now firmly embedded in the rock, as well as its bright red and stinging tail. Only the tip of its tail was sticking out of the rock. I knew it. When it tried to breathe fire to melt the rock, it found that it could not move its head toward its feet because its neck was also stuck in the rock. The three rushed toward the exit without stopping. However, it didn't seem to be a long tunnel. and they ran very far, but they still could not see the exit. Impossible. There must be another way. Should we swim through the magma to the outside world? Nah. How could this happen? Boom. Looking at the stone wall, which was a slightly different color from that of the other tunnel, Cryste smashed her fist into it. The wall didn't move, but blood began to trickle from her bare fist. You are an idiot. What do you expect to gain from that? For the first time, Noel seemed a little angry, and then he ripped off a piece of his white shirt and wrapped it around her hand. I'm sorry, but I don't know what to do. It was not easy to escape the clutches of the monster, and it was still stuck behind them. This must have been a better option than fighting it. But things didn't seem any better. There seemed to be no end to this scorching hot tunnel. No fork in the road and no exit. Cryste stood in front of the stone wall, a look of desperation on her face. With their backs to the wall, they slowly slid down and sat on the warm ground. They took deep breaths of the hot air, the burning sulfuric fumes filling their nostrils. Oh, that does not sound pleasant. Cryste looked at the boy next to her, and he returned her gaze with a great smile, a gentle smile. Suddenly, a feeling overcame Cryste that there was something important to tell him. No matter how emotional she was, it was still hard for her to say it, just like a broken faucet without any water. Okay. Sure. At least she merely uttered the simplest words. At last, she merely uttered the simplest words. Thank you, Noel. Don't mention it. After all, I don't know any healing magic, so I can only handle it temporarily. If you have a scar on your hand, you can't go back, you must. Yes, even at this time, he was still taking care of her. She shook her head gently. I'm not talking about that. You did so many things before. Really, thank you. Oh? Boy tilted his head as if he didn't understand, but Cryste ignored him and just continued her speech. The first time I met you, you didn't get mad at me, even though I was out of place. I was so angry, but it was really all because of me. Later, you appealed to my spoiled emotion in order for me to get along with Sylvie. After hearing this, the girl on the right moved slightly, but did not interrupt. And then you saved my life. I really appreciate how gentle you are, and yes, for a moment, it was really at that moment that I felt lucky to be able to marry you. Because of him, everything I've been concerned about can be solved. After all, I'll be able to spend the rest of my life with him. After Cryste said this to her, she felt a little embarrassed. Her cheeks were so red that it was as if the hot air was burning them. However, no one started laughing, but Sylvie turned her head away in annoyance. I feel the same way, Cryste. First time I saw you, I just... Brother. A roar echoed from deep in the cavern, interrupted Noel's words. Sylvie trembled slightly. If not because of the dragon's roar, she wouldn't dare interrupt her brother. The roar from the flame salamander rang out clearly, making them all aware of what was going on. That big lizard should be stuck in the ground, as you said. Sylvie paused for a moment and she looked at Cryste with cold but friendly eyes. The water will vaporize after touching the hot magma, and the rapidly cooling magma will return to its original form and become an extremely hard rock, though I don't know the specifics. But if everything is worked out, the monster should be perfectly trapped. Cryste explained junior high school level physics using words that Sylvie could understand. What are you talking about? I'm telling you that he's the same as before. Really? No, it seems to be crying like a child. I can tell that much. It's saying, come back, my container, and it keeps repeating it. Since it's calling this out, it means it hasn't escaped yet. On another note, maybe we should decide how we will keep from starving to death, and we still don't know whether the meat of the monster tastes good. Well, who's gonna die first, though, to eat the other ones? The salamander or them? Who eats who first? Cryste smiled weakly. Cryste was about to close her eyes and take a rest, but Noel and Sylvie looked at each other, and suddenly they moved closer to Cryste. What are you doing? Could it be... Even if the situation is this bad, don't do this, for the three of us. At least I have a sense of shame, too. They are brother and sister, but Sylvie does love Noel. Would they really do something like this? They think they're gonna eat her? What are you talking about? Cryste, what did you say? Could you repeat that again? Both Noel and Sylvie's expressions were serious. They didn't seem to be doing what I imagined. For what I just said, I'll forget it. We don't know whether the meat of the monster tastes good? No. The question was simply no. Wait a minute. And the other thing I wanted to say is, come back, my container. The eyes of the three suddenly staggered in one place. Yeah, what they said. They said in unison. Cryste, how can you understand it? I don't know. I don't know anything about this strange words. At first it was really complicated and I didn't notice it, but resting and hearing it just now, a meaning rose in my head. That reminded Cryste of the first time she was in the darkness. She was by the ocean, but she just thought it was an illusion until Noel showed up. When I see the flame salamander, it makes it seem more real than normal due to the use of its mana. You said before that you only saw the monster in front of the door of mana. Not only does she have a good memory, she's also smart. That's right. When I was at the training ground, Noel and my sister helped me open the door. But isn't that something everyone sees? Like a monster or something like that? Maybe she didn't see the door of mana. Noel shook his head. Neither of us have had an experience like that, and it doesn't seem like a good sign. Maybe because you're a member of the royal family that you can see it. But this passage doesn't lead anywhere, and it's unlikely that there's any exit, or the clown wouldn't have sent me here. After all, this is the holy land of the flame salamander. It's not just a place you can normally come in and out of. Right? Anyway, I still think we should go back and see the salamander. Cryste made the conclusion in a single sentence. Noel and his sister looked at each other and nodded silently. Oh, so they're going along with it, huh? No one wanted to go back there. But there was no other choice. Perhaps it was because of the situation that Cryste led the way. That, perhaps in their despair, they were forced to resort to his last option. Cryste was still being held in Sylvie's arm. Sylvie used her wind to jump back into the cavern from the entrance 2 stories above the hardened magma. So they had to climb up. In a show of frozen salamander, the ground was still steaming hot. The cry of the salamander was translated in Cryste's mind, and she listened to it the whole way back. Its words were troubling as she summoned up all of her courage to tell herself that there was nothing to be frightened about. Looking down at the dark space below, the hard rock was still smoldering menacingly. The body of the salamander remained motionless, but after seeing Cryste, it suddenly struggled to raise its head and growl. But almost its entire jaw was buried in the rock. The situation was much better than even Cryste had imagined. The salamander couldn't even breathe fire. Maybe it will be stuck here forever like a living specimen. The flame salamander doesn't die naturally, so it's really a pitiful sight. Oh, someone could free it. Noel looked at the ground and looked at Cryste, who smiled happily. The ground should still be burning hot. The rock shouldn't have cooled down completely. Well, I have no problem with it. Huh? Nothing can hurt me here. Cryste said confidently. She had hesitated before, but now it was completely different. She wanted to come back. The monster howling on the ground had been telling Cryste all sorts of things in terms of its anger. Now that she was aware of everything, she showed a calm expression to the other two. Safe. Can you help me down? Magic is a powerful thing, a force that can stop a person mid-sentence. But why did the flame salamander show up in front of the door of mana? Why was Cryste wearing this magic guide? Just now everything made sense. Are you sure? Cryste nodded her head. The monster looked so repulsive from up here, I almost feel sympathetic for it. This height, although I won't die, I might break my legs. Hey, are you really going to jump? We can look for other exits. Havan Ashavad, Wind's Blessing. Suddenly, I feel a lot lighter. I've been recovering my strength, so I can use magic again. Noel smiled at Cryste. Be careful, Cryste. Just leave it to me. We're gonna go have a conversation with this monster, huh? Noel gently held his sister's hand as she stepped forward to release the spell. Trust Cryste. It's okay, I've got it all figured out. Sylvie is not my enemy forever. I thought that they were, like, made amends. Cryste's body was slowly following, like a dandelion seed, fluttering in the wind and stopped before the salamander's big head. It's a little hot for the soles of my feet, but it doesn't hurt. Cryste touched the magic guide hanging around her neck. The heart of Eli. She breathed a sigh of relief. Even if his jaw was fixed there, it could easily swallow me whole. But Cryste knew that that wouldn't happen. She reminded herself that it wasn't a salamander in front of her, but mana itself. He told Cryste that she was the container for the flame salamander. To leave this place would need to carry its soul, and because she was the princess of the Kingdom of Flame, only she could do it. Accept it, and they would be able to leave together. Otherwise, they would stay here and die. Cryste gently stroked the salamander's scaly head. It closed his eyes like a purring kitten. Flame salamander didn't mean to hurt Cryste in the first place. It just wanted to be one with her by giving up its soul. It only started battling because Noel and Sylvie showed up. The hand that was wrapped in the boy's shirt was no longer in pain. The wound had completely disappeared. You must be very lonely in this place, all alone. I clearly know this feeling. It gave a quiet cry. I could take you from here. I can be your container, or whatever. But I have a condition. You have to promise me. The girl reached out her hand. The flame salamander widened its eyes as if waiting for her words. First, don't hurt my friends. Second, you are not allowed to show up without my permission. And the most important thing is never to betray me, no matter what happens. I will accept as you agree, or else we will turn and leave to our deaths. But you will never leave here either. Close your eyes if you agree to these terms. Cryste said this with a strong tone and a commanding attitude. It was not an act, however, but a statement. The salamander dropped its eyelids. At that moment, its body turned into a red light, like the stars in the night sky, flying all around Cryste before they disappeared suddenly. In front of her, there was only a hole left from where the salamander had been trapped. Cryste turned and looked at Noel and Sylvie, who had stayed in the tunnel. They froze in place, as if they had just witnessed an incredible miracle. And now it really was a miracle. I've never felt so peaceful. The monster was now living in her body, and she wondered what would happen now that it was. Because of this, they could leave the cave. Okay, so now she's imbued with fire magic, and not just illusion magic, right? As the magma faded, the temperature in the cave reduced. And off away we go. Cryste jumped up to the tunnel with the help of an undiminished wind spell. Let's go back. Okay. Yeah, but I thought they were trapped and they couldn't find a way out. You know, we might have done something really, really amazing just now. Maybe so, but I just did what was the best in the given situation. I tried my best to maximize my talent when it is needed. And that's enough. Meanwhile, yep, we're at the epilogue. I thought we were getting close. Rod Cothard. In a city named after Redstone, red was naturally the dominant hue. People liked to place red decorations in their houses. If they were noble or were wealthy, they would even place down red carpets. Now, however, the mage Mikhail was a little sensitive to the red book in the king's hand. The Kingdom of Flame was just confronted with a large fire-related disaster. What do you think about Cryste's kidnapping? The king turned around. For some reason... Oops, I missed that. Bumped the button. For some reason, his voice sounded unusually low and heavy. It made Mikhail a little uneasy. King Kane has always been a wise king. Every time he asked Mikhail a question, he was like a freshman in college. He consulted her carefully, which was one of the reasons that Mikhail was able to help him for so long. But now he exuded a sense of great pressure toward her, almost making her breathless. It doesn't seem to be because his daughter was kidnapped, though. It seems to be something darker and even more terrible. The great magician Mikhail, aware of this, swallowed. She also swallowed what she wanted to say. After the Market Square incident, she planned to immediately report to the king. However, she didn't expect that the search group headed by Catherine and Crow would find the princess in the forest outside of town covered in sweat. Reluctantly, she had to wait until the next day to inform His Majesty of her discovery after everyone had already finished reporting. Your Majesty, I think it's related to the nobles. This is not what she intended to say. The salamander, jumping out of the magical ball of darkness, might not have been noticed by the others, but it couldn't escape the eyes of Mikhail. Captain of the guard reported to His Majesty that it was only a demon. It makes sense after all. Mikhail's magic could have burnt his demon to ashes. No one would associate with the flame salamander. The little farce that took place at the market ended the next morning, and people went back to their shops, but rumors spread like wildfire. No pun intended. Or maybe literal pun intended. The nobles? What do they want from the princess? I don't know. But there are traitors in the palace. They might even be close to the princess. Crow? Was it Crow's doing? The assassin spell was not something a normal person would cast. There must have been a very large force behind him, with the purpose of perhaps destroying the relationship between the royal palace and the Duke of Sahavel through the princess. Mikhail was quickly making up lies to not expose herself. Well, let's leave it alone for now. I'm going to reschedule Cryste's marriage. That's like a year out. The king seemed uninterested in the matter. Suddenly shocked, Mikhail with his last words. Are you serious? Now that Sahavel is in the palace, you intend to cancel the marriage? What on earth do you mean? Tell me the reason for this. The reason? It's just that I don't think Duke Sahavel could help me. Still, I don't want to hurt our relationship just yet. I'll tell him during the time of the wedding next year. Oh, I'm really looking forward to the expression on his face. Yes, the surprise will push me through this boring year. It doesn't make any sense. Mikhail was speechless. You're crazy. She shook her head helplessly as she drew back, as if the man in front of her had turned into a terrible beast. The king suddenly turned around and pushed the back of Mikhail's shoulders with incredible strength. Before she knew what was going on, his hand was reaching out to her breast. What? Pat. She knocked his hand away before he could touch the soft part of her chest. Your Majesty. No. No, you're not His Majesty. You don't trust me, Mikhail? With these fading words, the king grinned with a large, chilling smile. This man was not Cain. Mikhail was sure. She stepped back and bent deeply. I will take my leave, Your Majesty. When she opened the door, she fled from the study. But for a moment, her feet were glued to the floor. What happened just now seemed to have been in slow motion. Her long silver hair fluttered in the breeze, and ripples formed in her large red eyes. Mikhail's eyes were opened widely, as when she saw who was there. Your Royal Highness. Mikhail held her hand to her mouth. She couldn't believe that Cryste was there. Oh no, she heard the conversation in the study just now. So... Before Cryste could say anything, Mikhail took her slender arm and carried her to a corner. I need to tell her. I need to warn her. Although I know the truth, I can't tell her everything just yet. In reality, there may never be a chance to tell her. It was the perfect weather to set off. The sun hung high in the blue sky. The Duke and Duchess took Noel and Sylvie to say their final farewells to the King of Garnet at the gate of the city. The simple carriage came slowly, but the conversation continued between the King and Duke. It was very hot, especially for Cryste, who rarely went outside. She felt very uncomfortable. Finally, the two men shook hands and said goodbye. Noel, Sylvie, let's say goodbye to Cryste. The brother and sister nodded their heads obediently, and Sylvie, with her hair tied in a single ponytail, was the first to come to Cryste. Sylvie just stared at her. Shouldn't girls be friendly to each other? That's how it was in all the animes. No, so, Miss Sylvie, is this how you say goodbye? Cryste was a little upset. I never lose to anyone, but for you, I can accept a loss. Huh? After that, Sylvie went back to her mother's side. What loss? Are you saying the loss of your brother and marriage? She was the same as always, pure like the wind. Mikhail didn't come today, but Cryste's father was as calm as usual, as if nothing happened. Cryste didn't hear the whole thing, but yesterday her father nearly attacked Mikhail in the study. This is an indisputable fact. Even now, Mikhail's words still echoed in her ears. Do not trust anyone in the palace, even your own father. Someone close to you has betrayed you, Your Highness. She couldn't help but look back at the crowd. The captain of the guard was an old man Cryste had seen several times. Catherine, Sophie, and Crow in the civil service group. Sister in armor, smiling mother, father. Everyone should be Cryste's companion. But some of them have betrayed me. They did something to make the clown send me to the flame salamander. Yes, that is a legit thing that happened. That is not a made-up sentence. that is a true sentence. The clown sent the princess to the flame salamander. While Cryste thought about this, Noel ran over to her, his face a deep red. They had fought through life and death together, but the dumb words she said before made her blush. The atmosphere became somewhat awkward, and as Cryste turned her head, the crowd seemed to be struggling to keep her eyes on her. Only her mother gave her a tender smile. The girl sighed as if she had made up her mind and took another step forward. She's going with him? So close. Cryste was so close that she almost touched Noel's little nose. The youth said only half of what he wanted to say. Nah, he didn't even continue. Because he was kissed. Not on the lips, though. Noel's cheeks were as soft as cotton candy. He's like 13. What? Oh dear. How nice it is to be young. Grown-ups are really annoying. Maybe from their point of view. I just kissed Noel on the lips, but it wasn't quite the same thing, however embarrassing it was. Cryste ignored Sylvie's hostile expression, who was held back by the Duke as if she were going to kill her. In the ear of the young man, Cryste whispered softly her farewell words. Ah, she's not going. I thought she would try to escape with him, or at least try to convince them. Please help me. I can only believe in you. The end. Of part 1, that is. So that was a decent cliffhanger. I admit, like, it had enough going for it that I don't feel like I have any questions that I want answered. Outside of the obvious ones that they didn't explain. Like, does the marriage actually happen? Why was the father just suddenly not himself at the end there? I don't know. Oh, concept art. Nice. I mean, the story was okay. I'm sad I didn't get to make any choices, though. From what I understand, made with Unity. I think over half the games I've played have been made with Unity. Not saying it's a bad thing. I think that's pretty neat that so many people can utilize it to make games. That is, if you want to call this a game. This was like borderline not even a game. It's you click the button to advance the text, but you can do that on a Kindle or on a Nook or something, right? Like you don't need to be on a computer to advance text and even pictures. So was it a visual novel? Yes, it was exactly a visual novel. Yep. So, with no alternate ending, there really is no replay value in this. Unfortunately, I had a setting on too high where it advanced text without my consent at the end of every chapter. So, like chapters 1 through 5, I completely missed the last couple sentences of each chapter. But I feel like after having seen the entire story, there wasn't probably much of anything that I missed, because the chapters that mattered most, which were the later chapters, I actually saw what was being said at the end of each chapter. And there was no way to actually go back and read it, unless having to start the entire chapter over. But I would give the art an okay. I mean, the art wasn't anything spectacular. There were some pretty cute characters, like that dress, that picture there was really neat. The ambient environment, like the clouds, the molten lava, the garden, you know, reasonably modest art. The characters they're fleshed out a decent amount. Like, I felt like it concentrated a little too much on the upper body of women. I'm sad that they do that. Like, this, you're doing a story about literal 12 and 13-year-old kids, and you're incorporating that kind of content in there, even though it wasn't visually explicit and it didn't get like sexually explicit. It still referenced it way too often. Like, why would it do that? Like, there was no need for it. They could have taken all of that out, and the story would probably be better in some sense, because I just don't see the reason for that. I like the part where she escaped, though. Where she escaped the castle and she was experiencing the town for the first time. Having been locked up in the kingdom her entire life. That was fun. Although I did find it interesting how Sylvie was doppelganging as her brother and interfered with Cryste when she was in the city. But how did she know she was going to be there? Like there, in that scene, that one, where she was in the alley and Sylvie was impersonating, doppelganging. How in the world did Sylvie know that Cryste was going to be there to set a bad precedent for her brother without her even meeting him? I don't know. That's the only part that I feel is a little stretched. Where she interfered with Cryste without even knowing her. Especially since she was in disguise too, you know? That was like a double confusing. Other than that, everything seemed to flow decently. This is my first visual novel I've ever played. I use the word played loosely, by the way. Since this is the first visual novel I've ever clicked through, I can't really compare it to anything, since I've never done any others. I've never played any other visual novels, so I don't know what I'd rate it. Like, as far as enjoyment, like, I laughed a couple of times, and I was interested in how the story was going to go. I wasn't bored. I never yawned once. I didn't... Maybe I didn't yawn because I was actively reading the story, but I feel like you can still yawn when you're reading out loud if you're bored enough, so... Yeah. There are certain parts of the story that it hung on, like explanation-wise. Like, it felt like it was a little too much into detail in certain parts and not enough detail into others. Like, it focused on certain things that just didn't seem important to extend the story. Not in a bad way, but just seemed a little lopsided on the content of importance. Like, I would have liked to know a little bit more about the backstory of the Wind people that came to the banquet. Noel's backstory a little more. Not Noel himself, but like the family backstory. But it was alright.